The abandoned vessel drifted quietly through the void of space, its once proud hull now battered and broken. The ship had been left behind by the alien race that had once called it their own. Its crew was long gone, and no one knew why it had been abandoned in this forgotten sector of the galaxy. The ship's systems were barely functioning, flickering lights and failing engines showing the extent of its decay. To the vast majority of the galaxy's inhabitants, it was nothing more than a useless relic, a piece of junk left to rot in the cold silence of space. But to the people of Earth, it was something different, something valuable. Humanity had always been resourceful, and when they found the ship, they saw opportunity. A few small ships were dispatched to investigate, their crews unaware of the true significance of what they were about to uncover. When they boarded the ancient vessel, the crew was greeted with nothing but silence. The halls were empty, the rooms dark and cold, as though the ship had been frozen in time. It was clear that whoever had built this ship had long since vanished, leaving it behind without a second thought. Yet, to the humans, it was not a graveyard. It was a treasure waiting to be unearthed. They began to explore the vessel, carefully stepping through the abandoned corridors. The ship's technology was far beyond anything they had seen before, yet it was clear that much of it was damaged or inoperable. The crew had no idea how to react to this ancient and alien technology, but they were determined to learn. As they moved deeper into the ship, they discovered something that sent a chill down their spines: an enormous hidden chamber. Inside the chamber, a large, dormant weapon lay untouched, sealed away as if waiting for someone to awaken it. The weapon was unlike anything the humans had ever seen. It was not just a gun or a bomb. It was a massive structure that seemed to pulse with a strange energy, its purpose unclear but undeniably powerful. The crew of the ship stared in awe and fear as they examined the weapon, unsure of how it worked or what it could do. They had no idea that the very moment they touched the weapon, they were setting something in motion, something that had been dormant for centuries. Back on Earth, the news of the discovery spread quickly. The leaders of humanity saw this as a massive opportunity, a chance to gain an advantage over the rest of the galaxy. The ancient ship, with its advanced technology, could be the key to elevating humanity to a new level of power. The weapon, though mysterious and terrifying, could be used to protect Earth from any external threats. Yet, no one knew exactly what they were dealing with. Was this weapon truly a force for good, or was it a dangerous tool that should be left untouched? As the humans began their work to repair the ship and understand its technology, they started to notice strange things happening. The dormant weapon, once still and silent, began to show signs of life. Small flickers of energy crackled through its structure, and the ship's systems, long thought dead, began to hum with power. It was as if the ship was awakening after centuries of slumber. But it wasn't just the ship. Something far more dangerous was stirring inside. In the depths of the vessel, the crew felt an uneasy sense of being watched. It was as though the ship itself was aware of their presence. Strange, unexplained noises echoed through the corridors. Some of the crew reported hearing whispers, soft voices calling out from the dark. But when they turned, there was no one there. Others claimed to see fleeting shadows moving in the corners of their vision. The ship felt alive, as if it were waking up from a deep, unnatural sleep. And as it did, the crew felt a growing sense of dread. Something ancient and powerful was about to be unleashed, and they had no idea what it would mean for humanity. The crew continued their work, unaware of the true danger they were awakening. They focused on repairing the ship's engines and learning how to operate its systems, all the while ignoring the signs that something was very wrong. The ship's pulse grew stronger, the hum of energy more intense, until it filled the entire vessel. It was then that they realized they were not alone. Something was inside the ship, something far older than they could ever imagine. The weapon had been dormant for so long, but now it had begun to stir. With each passing day, the situation grew worse. The strange sensations grew stronger, and the crew began to sense that the weapon was not merely a tool, It was something alive, something sentient. It had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the humans to awaken it. And now that it was awake, it was beginning to take notice of those who had dared to disturb its slumber. The crew's initial excitement about the discovery quickly turned to fear. They had opened a door that should have remained closed, and now they had no way of knowing what they had unleashed. The weapon was not just an object. It was a force, a power that humanity was not prepared for. And as the crew of the ship began to realize the true scope of their discovery, they understood one thing. They had made a grave mistake. They had awakened something that would change the course of history, and they had no idea how to stop it. The weapon inside the abandoned vessel had begun to stir in a way no one could understand. What was once a dormant ancient force, sealed away for centuries, was now coming to life. It wasn't just the flicker of lights or the hum of machinery. It was something far deeper. The ship, which had seemed lifeless and broken, now felt as though it was breathing, alive in ways that defied logic. The crew, once full of excitement and curiosity, were now growing uneasy with each passing moment. The air inside the ship felt thicker, heavier, as though the very walls themselves were pulsing with an unnatural energy. It started small at first, a faint vibration in the floors, a whisper that barely seemed to exist. But as the crew made their way deeper into the heart of the vessel, the sensations became more pronounced. The ship's internal systems began to respond in ways that were impossible to explain. Communication systems crackled to life, displaying strange symbols and alien text no one on Earth could decipher. The ship's old weapon systems, once thought to be inactive, began to power up. In the distance, the crew could hear the eerie sound of metal shifting, echoing through the halls of the broken ship. One by one, they noticed the changes. The walls that had once seemed cold and distant now seemed to pulse with energy. The crew's initial optimism began to fade as they realized the scale of what they had found. The weapon they had discovered wasn't just a tool for destruction. It was far more. It was alive, sentient even, and it was beginning to react to their presence. Its power, once sealed away, was now starting to build, reaching a level that no one on the ship could fully comprehend. The crew could feel it in their bones. A rising tension in the air, a storm about to break. As days passed, the ship's systems grew more unstable. What had initially seemed like a simple repair job had turned into a nightmare. The crew's attempts to control the ship's systems only made things worse. Every effort to understand the alien technology seemed to provoke a more aggressive response from the vessel. The weapon, once dormant and mysterious, was beginning to awaken with terrifying force. It wasn't just a piece of machinery anymore. It had a purpose. And that purpose was not to coexist with the humans who had dared to disturb its slumber. The crew's unease turned to panic when the weapon's energy core activated. The temperature inside the ship skyrocketed, and strange, unexplainable phenomena began to occur. Lights flickered violently, and the ship's internal gravity systems began to fail intermittently. The crew had no choice but to evacuate to the lower levels, where they tried to regroup and assess the situation. But as they descended deeper into the vessel, the ship seemed to grow more hostile. The very walls seemed to push back against them, as if the ship itself was alive, aware of their presence. At this point, the crew realized something they had overlooked. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a weapon with a mind of its own. Whatever had designed it had left behind more than just instructions. They had left behind a consciousness, an intelligence that had been dormant for centuries. And now, that consciousness was beginning to stir. The situation grew more desperate as they scrambled to shut down the weapon before it could do any damage. But every attempt to deactivate the systems was met with failure. The ship had its own agenda, and the humans were simply intruders. The closer they came to the heart of the ship, the more they realized just how much danger they were in. The weapon's purpose was no longer a mystery. It was clear now. This wasn't just a weapon to be wielded. It was a weapon designed to destroy entire civilizations, a tool meant to obliterate all in its path. And humanity, unknowingly, had become its next target. The crew's leaders, once hopeful that this discovery could bring power to Earth, were now filled with dread. They had come to realize that they had opened a door that should never have been touched. The weapon was not something they could control. It was beyond their understanding. In their search for answers, they had only uncovered more questions. What had this weapon been designed for? Why had it been abandoned? And more importantly, why had it been left here, waiting for someone to awaken it? The answers to these questions seemed just out of reach as the weapon continued to power up, its energy building to an uncontrollable level. The crew knew that if they didn't act soon, they might not be able to stop what they had started. But with each passing hour, it seemed less and less likely that they would be able to undo the damage they had done. The weapon had become too powerful, too aware. In the dim light of the ship's lower levels, the crew members gathered together, staring at the pulsating energy core that had once been dormant. The realization was sinking in. They had triggered something far greater than they could have ever imagined. A weapon so powerful, so dangerous, that it could change the course of history if it didn't destroy them first. As the power surged through the ship, the crew braced themselves for what was to come. They knew they were no longer in control. Whatever happened next, they were about to face a force far beyond their understanding. The universe had no idea what it was about to experience, but humanity was about to find out just how far they were willing to go to survive. The air inside the abandoned ship felt thick with tension, almost as if the very walls were alive and watching the humans who dared to trespass. The crew had never felt anything like it. This was no ordinary vessel. The ship's power systems, which had been dormant for centuries, hummed louder with every passing minute. The energy readings were off the charts, growing exponentially, as if something deep within the vessel was coming to life. The crew stood at the threshold of the weapons chamber, staring in disbelief. They had thought it was just another piece of advanced alien technology, a relic of a forgotten race. But now, they were beginning to understand that it was more than that. This wasn't just some artifact. It was a living, breathing force. They had unwittingly awakened it, and now it seemed to be aware of their every move. Captain Jenna Martin, the leader of the crew, looked around at her team. Their faces were pale, a mixture of fear and awe in their eyes. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice tight. "This is not what we thought it was." But it was too late. The hum of the ship's engines reached a deafening pitch, vibrating through the metal walls and rattling the crew's bones. They could feel the ship's core thrumming with an intensity they couldn't explain. It wasn't just a machine. It was alive. Suddenly, the doors to the chamber slammed shut with a violent force, locking the crew inside. The lights flickered once more before plunging them into darkness. Panic spread through the team as they fumbled for their flashlights. Captain Martin could hear the distant, eerie sound of machinery moving, metal groaning, as if the ship itself was waking from a long slumber. A low, guttural hum echoed through the corridors, sending shivers down their spines. The ship's internal systems had come online, but something was different. The crew could feel it, a presence, something watching them. But there was no one there. They were alone. Or so they thought. "Is anyone else hearing that?" Lieutenant Jake Carter whispered, his voice barely audible. Martin nodded, her eyes scanning the darkness. "We're not alone. Whatever this ship was, it's not just a weapon. It's something more." Suddenly, a flash of light illuminated the chamber as the central core powered up. The once dormant weapon came to life in front of them, its intricate designs glowing with an eerie green energy. The crew had no idea what they were looking at, but one thing was certain: they had made a mistake by coming here. This was no ordinary alien weapon. It was a force, something that had been waiting for centuries to be awakened. Before anyone could speak, a voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the ship's speakers. It was not a voice the crew could understand, but the tone was unmistakable, cold, commanding, and filled with ancient power. "No," Martin breathed, stepping back. "This ship, it's not just a weapon. It's a warship. The realization hit them all at once. The ship had not been abandoned because it was useless. It had been abandoned because it was far too dangerous. Whoever had built it had sealed it away, ensuring that no one could ever activate it. And now, through their curiosity, they had done just that. The weapon, whatever it was, began to hum louder, its energy growing stronger. The ship's walls shook as if it were awakening from a long sleep. The crew exchanged nervous glances, knowing they had no way of stopping it now. The ship's power was beyond their comprehension, and it was only a matter of time before they were caught in its deadly wake. "Everyone, get back to the ship," Martin ordered, her voice firm despite the fear that gripped her. "We need to leave, now." The crew scrambled to move, but the ship seemed to fight them at every turn. The corridors twisted, changing as though the ship itself was reshaping its interior to keep them trapped. Each step they took felt heavier, more suffocating, as though the ship was trying to pull them deeper into its heart. The strange voice echoed again, louder this time, more insistent. It wasn't just a warning, it was a command. The ship's systems surged, and the crew could feel the temperature rise, the air becoming thick and heavy. Something was coming, something that had been dormant for centuries, waiting for the right moment to awaken. As they reached the nearest exit, they were met with another shock. The door was locked, sealed by some unseen force. The crew tried to pry it open, but the ship wasn't allowing it. The weapon's power was beginning to take control of the vessel, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Panic swept over the crew as they realized they were trapped. They had awakened something that could destroy them all, and now there was no escape. The ship, the weapon, it was no longer a passive entity. It had a will of its own, and it was turning its focus on the intruders. "Captain," Lieutenant Carter gasped, his eyes wide with fear. "What do we do now?" Captain Martin stared at the door, her mind racing. They had to find a way out. They had to stop this weapon before it was too late. But as the lights flickered and the ship's systems hummed louder, she knew one thing. They had already crossed the point of no return. The ship was alive, and it wasn't going to let them leave. The weapon had awoken, and now it was coming for them. The ship's internal systems hummed louder, filling the air with a strange vibration that seemed to echo through the crew's very bones. The crew could feel the temperature rising again, the air growing denser with every passing second. The walls of the ship trembled as though it was preparing for something catastrophic. Captain Martin stood frozen, her mind racing as she tried to process what had happened. The crew was trapped, and the ship was now in control. "No way out," Lieutenant Carter whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing noise. "The door won't budge." The crew tried to force the doors open, but they remained locked, sealed by an unseen force. Panic began to spread as the crew realized that the ship wasn't just alive. It was actively trying to keep them in. They were no longer explorers on a mission. They were intruders on a vessel that had its own plans for them. Martin's eyes darted around the chamber, searching for any sign of hope, any escape route. But the walls were closing in on them. The ship seemed to be growing stronger, more alive by the second. And the voice, the strange, commanding voice that had echoed through the ship earlier, was now speaking again, louder and clearer than before. It wasn't in any language the crew could understand, but its tone was unmistakable. It was a command, a warning. The voice was not speaking to them, but through them. The crew could feel it in the pit of their stomachs, a deep, unsettling pressure that threatened to crush them. "What is it saying?" Carter asked, his voice tight with fear. "I don't know," Martin answered, her eyes scanning the walls for any hint of a way out. "But whatever it is, it doesn't want us here." The ship's systems continued to hum, and with each passing second, the energy within the vessel grew stronger. The crew could feel the ship's power surging, building to an almost unbearable level. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a force of nature, something far beyond their understanding. The power coursing through the ship was alien, ancient, and it felt like the ship was trying to draw them into it, as though it wanted to consume them. "We need to get to the bridge," Martin said, her voice steady despite the rising panic. "There might be a way to shut it down from there." The crew didn't hesitate, moving quickly down the darkened corridors, the strange hum of the ship following them like a shadow. The walls pulsed with an eerie light, and the air felt thicker, harder to breathe. It was as though the very ship itself was fighting them, unwilling to let them escape its grasp. As they reached the central hub of the ship, they found themselves standing before a massive control panel, its surface glowing with the same alien symbols that had appeared earlier. The crew had no idea what any of it meant, but they knew one thing. This was the heart of the ship, the place where its power originated. If they had any hope of stopping it, this was their last chance. But as they moved to engage the control panel, the lights flickered again, and the ship groaned in protest. The air around them grew colder, and the walls seemed to pulse with a violent energy, almost as if the ship itself was alive and aware of their every move. The voice echoed again, this time more forceful, more demanding. The crew could feel the pressure building, a sense of urgency swelling in their chests. Whatever the ship was trying to do, it was happening now, and they were powerless to stop it. Suddenly, the control panel lit up, revealing a series of strange symbols. The crew watched in horror as they began to change, shifting and rearranging themselves, forming words in a language they could almost understand. It was as though the ship itself was trying to communicate with them. "Are we supposed to?" Carter started, but his voice trailed off as the symbols flashed brighter, each one more urgent than the last. Martin took a deep breath. "It's not asking us to stop it. It's telling us that we are the last ones who can. This ship is a weapon we've activated, and now it's going to destroy everything in its path." Her words hit the crew like a thunderclap. The realization was horrifying. They had unleashed something far beyond their control. The ship, once a tool of unimaginable power, was now awake, and it was gearing up for war. "We need to get out of here," Martin said, her voice shaky but determined. "Now." The crew turned to run, but as they did, the ship seemed to respond. The walls shifted again, this time closing in on them, sealing their only escape routes. The ship had become a trap, and they were its prey. Martin's mind raced. They had to get the weapon under control, or they would be the first victims of its power. She had no idea how they could possibly stop it, but she knew one thing. They couldn't let it reach Earth. They had to find a way, or everything they had ever known would be wiped out in an instant. The ship's humming grew louder, now a deafening roar. And the voice, the cold, ancient voice, spoke once more, a final command. "You have awakened me. Now you will see what I can do." The crew froze in terror, the weight of the voice's words sinking in. Whatever the ship was about to do, it was going to be far worse than anything they could imagine, and they were about to face the full force of a weapon they had never understood. The countdown had begun. The ship's hum was deafening now, vibrating the very bones of the crew, making their hearts race. It was as if the ship itself was alive, responding to the fear it had induced in the humans who had dared to awaken it. The walls seemed to pulse with an eerie rhythm, the lights flickering sporadically in time with the deep, unsettling hum that had overtaken everything. The ship was no longer just a silent vessel in space. It was a living, breathing entity with a mind of its own. Captain Martin's eyes were wide with a mix of terror and determination. The voice had spoken again, this time with an ominous finality, and she knew that whatever happened next, there was no turning back. The ship wasn't just a weapon. It was a destroyer, a force of unimaginable power that had been waiting for centuries to be activated. And now it was awake. "Where do we go?" Lieutenant Carter asked, his voice barely a whisper, fear evident in every word. "There's no safe place on this ship," Martin replied, her mind spinning. She could feel the pressure building in the air, a suffocating weight that made it difficult to think clearly. The ship had sealed every exit, and there was no way to leave. The only way out was to shut it down, But the question was, could they do it in time? She turned to the control panel in front of her. The alien symbols were still flashing, more erratically now. The ship's systems were coming online at an alarming rate, each surge of energy filling the air with a sense of impending disaster. Whatever had been dormant in this vessel for centuries was now fully awake, and it was hungry for destruction. The core, Martin muttered to herself, looking over the flashing symbols. We need to get to the core. It's the heart of this ship. If we can destroy it, we can stop the weapon. But how do we even get there? Carter asked, his voice trembling with the weight of the situation. The ship won't let us. Martin didn't answer at first, her mind racing. There had to be a way to break through the ship's defenses, a way to reach the core. But as the ship's systems grew louder and more insistent, the crew felt the walls close in around them. The air was thick with the sound of machinery shifting, gears grinding as though the ship was preparing itself for something big. They had no time to waste. We move fast, Martin said, her voice firm despite the fear that clawed at her insides. We can't hesitate. The crew didn't need further instruction. They moved swiftly down the corridor, but the ship wasn't making it easy. The once smooth, metal floors now twisted under their feet, the passageways shifting like a living labyrinth. The walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, pressing in on them, and the air was growing colder by the second. The ship wasn't just keeping them trapped, it was trying to crush them. Martin could hear the hum of the ship's engines growing louder. The power was surging, building, and with it, the undeniable feeling of doom that settled over them. The weapon was preparing to fire, and if they didn't stop it, it would obliterate everything in its path. She didn't have much time to think. She could feel the panic rising in her chest, but she pushed it down. This was no time for fear. They had to fight. We need to reach the command center, she ordered, keeping her voice steadied despite the terror that gripped her heart. We can shut down the core from there. Move quickly. The crew pressed forward, their footsteps echoing in the hollow corridors, each one more treacherous than the last. The walls seemed to close in, and the temperature dropped even further, making it hard to breathe. The ship was no longer just a machine. It was a predator, hunting them down, and every step they took felt like it was pulling them deeper into its deadly embrace. Suddenly, the entire ship jolted violently, throwing the crew off balance. The power surged again, the ship groaning as if it were alive, and the lights flickered in a chaotic dance of blinding flashes. Something was happening. The weapon was preparing to fire. Martin could feel it in her gut. They were running out of time. Captain, Carter shouted, his voice strained with panic. We can't keep up. The ship, it's not just locking us in, it's moving faster than we can. Martin's eyes darted to the walls, watching in disbelief as they seemed to move, shifting and warping before her eyes. The corridors were no longer the same. The ship's design had changed in real time, as if it were alive and responding to their every move. The path ahead was no longer the one they had started on. It was changing, becoming more erratic, disorienting. This ship is a living nightmare, Martin muttered, trying to push through the growing panic. But we have to reach that core, or we're all dead. They reached a junction in the passageway, only to find it blocked by a massive, unyielding wall of metal. The crew halted, frustration and fear setting in. They were trapped once more. Martin's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. The ship's control systems were mocking them, playing a cruel game of cat and mouse. We need to find another way, she said, determination edging her voice. Split up. We'll cover more ground. The crew exchanged nervous glances, but didn't hesitate. They separated, moving down different passages, hoping to find a way around the metal barricade. As Martin turned a corner, she froze in her tracks. In front of her, a massive, glowing doorway loomed. It wasn't there before. The ship's systems had opened it just for her, beckoning her in. But this wasn't a sign of help. It was a trap. and they were walking right into it. A sense of dread washed over Martin as she stepped forward, the door slowly creaking open, revealing the heart of the ship. The hum of power grew deafening, and she could feel the intense energy radiating from within. The weapon's core was ready, and they had just walked straight into its firing range. The door slid shut behind them with a sharp metallic clang, sealing them into the heart of the ship. The room was vast, its dimensions impossible to measure, stretching far beyond what the crew had anticipated. The walls pulsed with an eerie, unnatural glow, and the air was thick with the hum of the ship's core, a constant, rhythmic throb that seemed to reverberate deep within their bones. Captain Martin felt the weight of the moment press down on her. They had made it this far, but now they were face to face with the ship's heart, the source of its power, the very core that had been dormant for centuries. And yet, as they stood there, the ominous feeling of being watched crept up on them. It was as if the ship itself was observing their every move, anticipating their next action. "We need to shut this thing down," Martin said, her voice a mix of determination and anxiety. Now, the core sat before them, a massive structure of glowing alien technology, its surface constantly shifting and pulsing with energy. Strange symbols danced across its surface, moving like liquid light, and at the center of it all was a dark, swirling vortex, a swirling eye of power that seemed to consume everything around it. Martin had never seen anything like it before. It wasn't just a weapon. It was something far older, far more advanced than anything humanity had ever encountered. "How do we even begin to stop something like this?" Carter asked, his voice tight with fear. The rest of the crew stood in tense silence, eyes glued to the core. No one had any idea what to do. They were staring at the source of the ship's power, and it was clear that whatever they did next could either save them or destroy them. "We find a way," Martin replied, her gaze fixed on the center of the core. "There has to be a shutdown protocol hidden somewhere within this mess of technology. We just need to." The ship groaned again, louder this time, as if protesting their presence. The very ground beneath them seemed to tremble, and the energy in the room surged, the hum growing into a deafening roar. Martin's eyes widened as she saw the swirling vortex at the core begin to expand. It wasn't just a power source. It was a weapon ready to unleash its full force. The walls of the room began to shift, the surface of the core reacting to their intrusion. The once smooth surfaces now seemed to writhe, changing shape with a fluidity that was impossible to understand. The room began to close in on them, the walls pulling inward, moving toward the center where the core stood. "Move," Martin shouted. Now. The crew scrambled, but the room had become a maze, the walls contorting and shifting with every step. Every passageway they tried to take seemed to collapse behind them, sealing them off from any escape. The ship was closing in, trapping them in the very heart of its power. It was as though the ship was alive, and it wasn't going to let them leave without completing its dark purpose. "Captain," Carter shouted, his voice panicked. "We need to shut it down. We don't have much time." Martin nodded, her mind racing as she scanned the room for any kind of control mechanism. Her heart was pounding, and the weight of the situation pressed down on her. They were running out of time. The core was unstable, and the ship's power was reaching critical levels. If they didn't stop it now, it would be too late. Her eyes landed on a console beside the core, its interface flashing with more symbols. It wasn't like anything she had ever seen, but it was their only shot. She sprinted toward it, her crew following closely behind. As she approached, a soft beep echoed from the console, followed by a low hum as the interface lit up. "This is it," Martin muttered, her fingers hovering over the glowing panel. She didn't know what any of the symbols meant, but she had to try. She pressed a sequence of buttons at random, praying for something, anything, to respond. The symbols shifted, but nothing happened. The ship's hum grew louder, more insistent, as if mocking her every attempt. "No good," she said, frustration rising in her voice. "It's not working." Then something shifted. The room suddenly went dark, the energy surging around them like an electric storm. The air crackled with tension, and a deep guttural roar reverberated through the ship, a sound that felt like it was coming from the very walls themselves. Martin's heart skipped a beat as she realized the ship had activated something far worse. The voice that had haunted them since they first boarded the vessel. "You awaken me. Now you will face the consequences." The words came, not through the speakers, but from everywhere. An ancient, cold voice that seemed to penetrate their very souls. It was more than a warning. It was a declaration of war. The ship had been waiting for this moment, and now it was going to destroy everything in its path. A blast of energy shot from the core, a wave of destructive force that shook the room to its core. The crew staggered back, barely avoiding the blast as the ship's systems began to overload. The walls shuddered and groaned, cracks forming in the once immovable structure. The room was coming apart at the seams. "We need to destroy the core. Now," Martin yelled, her voice barely audible over the growing roar of the ship. The crew rushed to the center, desperate to find a way to disable the weapon before it was too late. But as they drew closer, they could see it. Something moving in the core. Something alive. It was a creature, a sentient being, its shape shifting within the heart of the ship, its eyes glowing with an ancient fire. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a guardian, a protector of the ship's dark power, and it was waking up. The crew froze, horror flooding through them. The ship had not only been a weapon, it had been its own protector, a living entity designed to guard its power until the moment of activation. And that moment had come. The core began to pulse with terrifying intensity, the creature inside stirring, its power growing stronger. It was too late. The countdown had begun. The walls trembled again as the ship's systems shifted into overdrive. The air grew thick with an electric hum, and the ground beneath them quivered violently. Martin could feel the cold sweat on her brow, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. There was no time left, only chaos, only the growing sense that they were doomed. The creature inside the core was now fully awake, its shape more defined, more solid. Its glowing eyes burned with an ancient fury, and the very atmosphere around it seemed to distort, bending and twisting in unnatural ways. The ship's power surged around them, choking the air, warping reality. "Everyone, get back," Martin shouted, her voice barely carrying above the overwhelming roar. Her crew stumbled backward, eyes wide with terror, unable to tear themselves away from the horrifying sight in front of them. The creature spoke, its voice a guttural growl that reverberated through their bones. "You dare to challenge me?" Its words were more than just sound. They were a force, a presence that seemed to envelop them, suffocating them in its raw ancient power. The crew's knees buckled as the weight of its words pressed down on them, their minds reeling from the sheer terror of it all. "We have to shut it down. We can't let it go any further." Martin's words were urgent, but she knew deep down that they were running out of time. The ship was no longer just a vessel. It had become a weapon, a living, breathing entity bent on destruction, and it was ready to unleash its full force. The walls cracked again, and a blinding flash of light erupted from the core. The creature's form seemed to expand, a mass of shifting shadows and light, as if it were about to consume everything in its path. Energy poured from the core, flooding the room with destructive force. Martin pushed forward, determined not to let her crew die in vain. She had seen the power that the ship contained, the weapon it had the potential to unleash. But there had to be a way to stop it. There had to be. Then, as if by instinct, her hand reached for the glowing console once more. The ship trembled again, but this time it wasn't just from the creature's presence. It was from something else, something within the ship itself, that was beginning to react to her touch. The glowing symbols on the panel flickered, shifting and rearranging, as if the ship was responding to her. Her heart raced, and she realized that, somehow, she had unlocked a hidden interface. This was it, This was the key to stopping the ship, to stopping the nightmare they had awakened. "Carter, get the others out of here," Martin ordered, her voice now a fierce command. "I'll handle this." Without waiting for a response, she typed in the sequence of commands that were flashing on the console, hoping against hope that she was doing it right. The ship groaned, the walls vibrating more intensely, but this time it was different. The core's pulse slowed, its violent energy beginning to wane. The creature inside the core screamed, a sound that shook the very foundation of the ship. Its form writhed, twisting violently as if it were being pulled away, forced back into the heart of the machine. "No, no." The creature's voice, full of rage, filled the room. It was the voice of something ancient, something that had been slumbering for eons, only to be awakened by human hands. Martin's heart pounded in her chest as she continued to input the sequence, watching as the core's power began to drain. It wasn't over yet, but the ship's energy had started to stabilize. The creature's form flickered, its presence weakening with each passing second. "I need more time," Martin whispered to herself, her fingers flying over the controls. The pressure was overwhelming. But she couldn't stop now. Suddenly, the ship's alarms blared, an urgent warning piercing the air. The core's energy level was plummeting, but so was the structure of the ship. It was starting to tear itself apart. The vessel, once an imposing giant in the stars, was now on the brink of collapse, as if it were unraveling from within. The crew had backed up as Martin worked, but the tension in the room was palpable. The ship's collapse wasn't a matter of if, but when. "Captain," Carter called out, his voice tinged with panic. "We need to go. Now." Martin didn't look up. She was focused solely on the console, her mind racing with calculations and possibilities. If she didn't finish this, if she didn't stop the core now, they would all die. There was no escape from the power that was about to be unleashed. The only option was to stop it before it was too late. The creature's screams grew louder, more frantic. Its power surged once more, desperate to break free. But Martin wasn't going to let it. The console flashed one final time, and with a soft beep, the core's pulsing stopped. The ship fell silent. The walls stopped shifting, and the oppressive hum of energy faded away. For a moment, there was nothing but stillness. Then, with a final bone-shaking roar, the core exploded into a blinding flash of light. The ship shuddered violently as the energy released in a massive burst. The force of the explosion rattled the room, throwing the crew off their feet. Martin was thrown to the ground, her vision spinning as the shockwave of energy surged through the ship, shaking it to its very core. But as the light faded and the dust settled, one thing was clear. They had won. The ship's heart was destroyed, and with it, the nightmare that had haunted them. The power of the ship, the creature, and the weapon were no more. The crew lay on the floor, battered but alive. And as the sound of the ship's collapse echoed through the wreckage, Martin knew one thing for certain. They had just faced the impossible and survived.